everyone. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. I'm Jim Cardle. We're into the home stretch and within single digits of the March 6th primary, and State Railroad Commission Chairman Christi Craddick is on the ballot and crisscrossing the state, having her finger on the pulse of the Texas voter. We're pleased to be able to visit with Christi today about workforce issues, what it's like to work with the Trump administration, as well as the campaign trail and what's on the mind of the Texas voter. Texas Railroad Commissioner Christi Craddick is our guest today on Texas Insider TV. Well, Christi Craddick, Chairman of the Texas Railroad Commission, appreciate you taking time to come in to visit with us today.
Thanks for having me.
I want to, as I mentioned in the introduction, get into a couple different things in the oil and gas industry, the oil patch. But let's first, if we can, because the campaign season is upon us, we're into early voting already started. You're on the campaign trail. You're arguably, and I think provably, probably one of the hardest working statewide elected officials. And yet, in this day and age, it's getting kind of interesting out there on the campaign trail. Tell us how it's going, what you're hearing, what are the Texas voters thinking these days?
You know, it's been an interesting cycle, so we're hoping people are voting first and foremost, because I think that's the biggest concern, is that people get out and vote. Republicans aren't voting in the numbers the Democrats are, so remember that bodes not well for us if people don't get out and vote. But I was in Dallas this week. I've been across the state, had a little one sick for a couple days, took me off the trail, but we're past the flu, thankfully. So everybody wash your hands.
Tens of thousands of other Texans, yes.
But you know, it's. I think there's a little bit of a concern from my perspective, and the fact that people are not showing up to forums as much, and we don't know if they've already decided, which we hope they've decided for me, or if they're just not apathetic, or they have decided to stay home. So that's a concern, but we've had great results when we've been out on the campaign trail. We've gotten lots of good conservative endorsements, and we'll continue. We've got 12 more days, and so I'm hopefully going to go vote this afternoon or by the end of the week and take my daughter and remind her what voting's about, and so Mom will continue hopefully to have a job in about 2 weeks too.
Very good. As Phil Gramm used to say, a former senior senator, you're either running unopposed or you're running scared, so I know you're out there shaking the bushes. But how about the oil and gas industry? I was reading some information prior to sitting down, and you've been appointed to a National Energy Council. You're working with the new Trump administration. The oil patch is recovering. Prices are going up. It's all been part of the tenure that you've been now on your second term as chairman. Talk about the outlook for the oil patch, if you can, and what we're seeing in maybe the Permian Basin in particular, but across the state of Texas.
Well, we've seen a nice uptick with oil running at a roughly $60 to $62 a barrel today. What a change we are from a year ago or even 2 years ago. So for perspective, when I got to this job 5 years ago, oil was $100 a barrel. We were as low as $27 a barrel 4 years ago, and now we're back up to $62. It means a change in industry. They've gotten smarter, they've innovated, they're running more streamlined, they're using technology smarter, and we're trying to catch up and keep up at the Railroad Commission with those changes in the industry. But we're seeing them start employing people again. Obviously, we had a downturn, and so people were laid off. They had to go find another job. We lost about 400,000 jobs across this country. We're now back up. We think we've created another 100,000 again in this state alone. Okay. That's a plus. That means people are back to work. They're paying taxes. And taxes of all kinds. And so that's where it's the job creator of, frankly, the entire country is the energy industry, and Texas is the leader of it. And that's a plus. So we're seeing the Permian Basin continue to grow again.
I know you have worked with Governor Perry now, Energy Secretary Perry, during your career, and probably have had some interaction. What is it like working compared to an administration I think some Texas voters felt was a little heavy-handed? Now you've got a different perspective. Talk about the type of work you're doing with the Washington, D.C. folks, if you can.
So I was appointed to National Petroleum Council, actually from the last Secretary of Energy, who recognized Texas ought to be part of the conversation. But it is a breath of fresh air, obviously, with this Secretary of Energy. And it's nice to be on this committee. It's nice to share ideas, and I've I'm going to be involved with a research group that he has appointed, National Petroleum Council, to be involved with new technology.
Okay.
But I want to talk about a different agency that I had a meeting with on Friday.
Okay.
So I was invited to come to this meeting with the State Department. Interesting. Okay. Didn't know what it was going to be. Another group had invited me and another oil and gas group.
Run by a Texan, by the way.
That's right. And so, first time we've ever had a meeting, of course, with this particular agency, because they weren't overly friendly necessarily with us in the last administration. But I wasn't sure what the meeting was going to be about. And I walked in and I took general counsel. Somebody else took general counsel. We didn't know what the conversation was going to be about. And it may have been the friendliest conversation we've had with an administration, because they wanted to know what Texas was doing, what Texas ideas were, how they could bring Texas ideas not just to the rest of the country, but other countries like Mexico, Poland, friends of ours, what we were doing with pipelines, what our rules look like. We're like, oh, how nice, and we'll be glad to share anything we want that you want out of our world, because that's what we think this should be about. And thank you for recognizing that Texas is doing it the best, and we will be glad to help anybody who wants help for the energy industry across the world.
Kind of made your day, I imagine. Was there any discussion about national security from an energy
National
standpoint?
security, we talked about a little bit about NAFTA, how energy ought to be part of the NAFTA conversation, and that NAFTA clearly is important but needs to be reworked. But national security is clearly a priority, and this administration gets it, and how refreshing it is from 15 months ago.
Yeah. Folks, I want to thank you again for joining us for this edition of Texas Insider TV. We're visiting with Railroad Commission Chairman Christi Craddick, who's up for re-election and been serving on the Railroad Commission as chairman now in her second term. Chairman, let me ask you one final thing, because we may get into this. You mentioned a second ago 400,000 jobs were lost, and now we've recreated some of that. Talk about not necessarily the education system, but we hear these ideas about truck drivers making six figures, about plumbers in hotels in the state of Texas. Talk about the need, if there is one, and what folks could maybe think about for employment in the oil and gas industry, because it can be a problem, correct?
It is. Where we really are lacking for us to grow long term in this industry is people. And so,
Really?
because you've got a whole generation who frankly didn't have an oil and gas industry in this country, if you think about it, from the mid-'80s to the early 2000s. So
Okay.
you've got a whole generation of, I call it the 40-somethings, maybe 50-somethings, who weren't involved in this industry. So we didn't train people. And our education system, STEM's important. This is the second most technologically advanced industry in the entire world.
Really?
And so you need people who know not just how to run a computer, but we still need welders.
In STEM, you're talking about science, technology, engineering, and math. Okay.
That's right. And this come from the liberal arts major on the commission, but we need people who can communicate as well. So we need liberal arts, but we need trained and a skilled workforce. So I say a welder is as important to us as an engineer, all the way, and the spans across all of it. If you want any kind of education spectrum, and we haven't prepared, not just in higher ed, but we haven't prepared our kids in public education and lower K through 12 for the right kind of skill set that we're going to need long term in this industry. So and they aren't educated about this part of the industry. They know to recycle, but they don't necessarily understand oil and gas and fossil fuels and how important they are for this country, what they do, that plastic, all of their plastic toys are a fossil fuel, right? And so they aren't educated in that respect, and that's going to be a long-term challenge to reform that part of the education world and put more education curriculum that is energy centric, I should say.
Okay.
And I wouldn't say necessarily, because windmills are as important in the state as other kind of energy too. They're hearing about windmills, but not about oil and gas. And so we need that skill set going forward.
How about, in particular, the population growth aspect of some of these numbers? You've talked about the economic impact, but we hear every now and then that there's 1,000 people moving to Texas every day. I imagine a lot of that is driven by the oil and gas industry. Have you all got any outlook for that type of impact on the Texas state and what's necessary for state government maybe?
We look at, just from my perspective, we look at what the industry pays in taxes, for instance, right?
Okay.
And so if you think about the rainy day fund, obviously it's all funded by oil and gas taxes. It's severance taxes, so that's who's paying the rainy day for the rainy day fund, which is $10 billion roughly today. But it's property taxes, it's sales taxes, all the tax base industry pays into. They're looking for housing. They are putting kids in public schools. Infrastructure is a real challenge, obviously. We all think about Austin or Houston or Dallas not having enough roads. Think about being out in the oil and gas fields and you're really basically on county roads or hard-packed dirt roads with big trucks.
Okay.
So it's a safety issue too for us. So as you're looking, so infrastructure is a real challenge long-term for the state. All of that's going to be important. And I always talk about, because I'm from West Texas, we talk about water. And you've got to have water infrastructure across the state, whether it's oil and gas or not. You've got to have water to grow. And so that's where it's really important that we're seeing $2 billion out of that rainy day fund being used for water infrastructure at this point. Industry is paying for the state to continue to be successful.
Yeah. One final question for Chairman Christi Craddick, the Texas Railroad Commission, and that is back to the campaign trail, and we'll let you get back to it. What's on your schedule, or what are you up to the next week as we run through the tape here on primary season?
Well, so we're making sure people get out and vote across the state. I'll be in Houston. We're doing actually an event in Austin, which we laugh, but we have stuff in Austin. So there is an important key thing to get young people as well as all of our key constituencies to get out and vote. So you're going to see us dropping mail and continuing to be engaged.
Well, good luck, and hope we'll have you back after the primary election as successful.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And folks, I want to thank you again for joining us for this edition of Texas Insider TV. Railroad Commission, or Christi Craddick, has been chairman now her second term, and taking time to visit with us today on the campaign trail. Christi, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Folks, be sure and tune in for another edition of Texas Insider TV. And remember, you're either an insider or you're not. I'm Jim Cardle. Thanks for joining us.